Hello and welcome. I'm Marty Kine. I'm a research VP at Gartner. And we are coming to you live from Think Tank by Adobe here in the beautiful, actually very beautiful offices of McGarry Bowen on the far, far west side of Manhattan, New York, in connection with Adweek. We're on 26th Street, actually near Chelsea Piers. And what we've done for your entertainment today is we've gathered 9 of the best-looking, most intelligent industry thought leaders in programmatic and other forms of advertising and media to talk about a very small, minor, trivial topic, the future of advertising. So what we did is we gathered last night with a dining experience where people actually kind of cooked in front of us, but we weren't paying attention. We were too wrapped up in our discussions about what's happening with advertising. And then today we got up at a very early hour and did our hair and makeup, as you can probably not tell from me, but in general. And we brainstormed for a while about things like dynamic creative and storytelling and personalization and ad fraud and all kinds of things, so supply-side auction shenanigans. And then we divided into 3 groups, and we have 3 big themes that we're covering today. And of course, 9 thought leaders, 3 groups, 3 people on each theme. And those themes are A, automation, or what we might call programmatic. What is the future of automation? Where is it going? T, transparency, big topic, actually the leading topic at Adweek last year. And then finally, my favorite, measurement. How do you actually measure and optimize and think about how advertising is impacting consumers, prospects, and customers, and so on. So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to our group. I think you'll like them as much as I do. They have a lot of great ideas. And we'll start over here on my right. We have Sharmilan Ryer, who is the VP of Audience and Programmatic at NBC Universal, doing a lot of interesting stuff in that space across both digital and linear. We have Megan Estrada, who is our VP of Media, coming to us from Las Vegas, where she was born and I believe grew up. Las Vegas, Nevada, that's right. And she has a system for the tables. VP of Media at MGM Resorts, not surprisingly. Then we have Will Warren, who is our EVP of Digital Investment at Zenith Media. He pointed out earlier it's investment, singular. I'm not sure what that investment is, but it's big. And then Keith Eady, who is the VP of the Adobe Advertising Cloud, who heads up Adobe's very interesting work in advertising and single-handedly has disproved my thesis that ad tech and martech will not converge. Right here, disproving it. Then on my left, joining me on the throne, is Jill Kress, who is the CMO of National Geographic, and who I think lives in DC.
Spending a lot of time in DC.
A lot of time in DC, okay. And then moving around, we have Aubrey Flynn, who is the coolest guy here by far. SVP and CDO, Revolt TV and Media, LA, home base. LA. Phil Gorin, Chief Integration Officer of our host, McGarry Bowen, and a man who's been in the creative space for a few years. Thank you for hosting us here. You have a great office.
Thank you.
Really nice. Then Kelly Andreessen, who is SVP at Get Creative at USA Today Network in DC. And then rounding us out is Gary Milner, our friend from North Carolina, Director of Global Digital at Lenovo. Although once he starts talking, you'll realize he's not from North Carolina. So we're going to start today. We have 3 teams, as I said. Each one has a self-appointed kind of spokesmodel. And you can see, based on our looks, that a spokesmodel is an appropriate term. And we're going to start with the backbone of advertising, especially now. And we're talking about advertising more broadly, I should say. We don't want to get into a rat hole around programmatic and RTB and so on. But although that will come up, trust me, we're talking about advertising. This is Adweek, so it's going to involve creative. It's going to involve offline as well as online media. And we're going to start with automation. So I'll hand it over to you to start, Phil.
Sure. So as a strategist, I immediately took the brief and then we changed it. So we did think about it in broader terms than just programmatic, because for us, automation is affecting everything. And it bleeds into artificial intelligence, it bleeds into so many spaces that are going to dictate the entire brand experience, not just media. So we thought about it in that realm. And right out of the gate, we decided it'd be good to make a first bold prediction, which is that by 2022, we believe that 80% of all quote-unquote advertising will be automated. However, there's two things that come along with that. One, we believe that that'll be a threshold that may never be surpassed. And the reason for that is because we believe that the other 20%, the human touch, brand storytelling, the idea of brand values and what that means, providing a brand platform that's media agnostic, and creating a brand compass that dictates what you do with the logical data that's out there, is going to be the real tipping point in terms of what drives the business. So it's not about driving people out of jobs, it's actually changing the job descriptions to access a whole new realm of advertising and what that means for the consumer. So again, 80% of advertising today, which is scary for me in a creative agency, will be automated. But we believe that it's unlocking a huge well of opportunity for what that means for the people who actually work in advertising and where we can drive brands and drive the business of brands moving forward. Because again, more than anything, I think data is probably the biggest topic that we hear in advertising today. And you hear it talked about often from a distance. For us, in the group that we were discussing, data really enables answers. It doesn't always deliver answers. And it's up to people like us to deliver those answers, and to do that with a healthy sense of skepticism sometimes, a healthy sense of optimism sometimes. And really it's bringing those two things together that we believe will drive the future of, it may be an automated world, but the more automated the world gets, the more we need humanity to have a very strong hold on the brands that we're creating for our customers.
Well, how are you guys defining automated? Because there's all kinds of ways of thinking of automated. It could just be rules set up in an ad server, or it could be intelligent decisioning at the last minute where the creative is being rendered on the fly and it's completely intelligent. Yeah.
For us, it's everything. For me, it's, and I'll let you guys speak also, for me, it's technology that enables us to run without a human touch. And I think that there are a lot of rules that can be set up to do that, but it's how that expands into a broader sense is going to be the real unlock for this. And I think that that's why without humans at the core, it assumes that everything works on a logical basis. And I think if the last 12 months in this country taught us anything, logic is a very hard thing to wrestle to the ground. So I don't know if you guys want to build on that.
Yeah, well, one of the second points that we actually had is that as more things become automated, it alleviates the sort of tactical work that somebody has to do, almost the grunt work, if you will, the rules-based decision making, where the team can actually talk about things that are human-based and not be so in the weeds of tactics, but actually delivering better customer service. So one of the examples in MGM Resorts, automation to us is not just how we market or how we go to market in media, it's also how we serve the customer. So from the time that you arrive in the airport, having a seamless experience where you can check in, actually have your key enabled on your phone, go to the property, and if you don't want to, never actually interact with a human. One of the things that we looked at in that experience, though, is that it becomes rather sterile and cold if you don't actually have a human element of it. So one of the things that we're doing out at one of the properties is looking at this lobby host or ambassador that sets the tone for the experience that you're going to have and welcomes you. It's an actual human, very personable human that then has the time to hear our customers' stories, has the time to hear why they're there, and make surprises for them, delight them with something based on that experience, because the tactical things of checking you into your room, putting your credit card on file, asking when you're checking out is all taken care of by technology. We think that's probably where jobs are going, and I think from a specific media landscape or marketing landscape, it has a similar implication where instead of looking at data or placing ads and doing an insertion order and making sure that the bills get paid on time, still very important, but a lot of that can be automated where you're actually looking at consumer insights and making larger strategic decisions based on those insights instead of being so in the weeds. So automation in both ways, rules-based where humans are still needing to make those rules, and then from a service standpoint where we're automating the less glamorous side of service.
Okay, and the way we're going to handle the format here is we want to give the team a chance to have their say, so they can get heard before people start piling on. But we're all, at a certain point in a moment, going to be able to react. There's some bold statements being made. I want to ask you, Sharm, though. So automation, I think of it programmatic, and it could be a real-time bid, or it could be a private marketplace, some other form of programmatic. That really, it's only, 10% of the 200 billion ad spend in the U.S. I mean, it's a small amount.
Right.
Growing, I admit, growing, from nothing like 10 years ago. What's the barrier to that 90% becoming automated? I mean, you're in the TV world. What's wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different aspects to it, right? If you think about Phil's point, like the macro level point about the 80-20, where we'll automate a lot of stuff over the next 5 years, but there's going to be some components that we'll need a human touch for. I think that one of the questions we debated as a team was can you automate love? If you think about programmatic today and in terms of what it enables, it's real-time decisioning. We've all seen the shopping cart that follows you across the internet till you actually complete the transaction. But is that, that's a tactic and there's a place for that, but then how do you tell your overall story to that consumer? And is that really, as a component of your experience and touch point with the consumer, is that the best way to interact with them? And so I think there's some macro level questions we have to ask about how we apply certain tactics and what their place is. Oftentimes it's framed in more of a binary term. It's like either or, but I think there's programmatic and automated buying is complementary, I think, to a lot of other tactics that marketers are employing. And so I think you have to think about it as part of the puzzle, but not the entirety of it.
What do you mean by can you automate love? That's an intriguing
it is, right? I mean, I think if I think about
robot lover,
the business we're in at NBC Universal, it's like we're in the business of storytelling, right? And that's what from a media selling perspective, that's what our clients come to us for, is to connect with our audience as we're telling a story, whether it's about an athlete, whether it's sort of a breaking news story, or if it's an entertainment drama. And for us, we view the advertising component as an extension of that storytelling. And so how do we connect that brand's message with our content in the most meaningful way to engender emotion? So if you think about a brand as just a series of associations, what we're in the business of is influencing what those associations are.
Does anyone else think that humans have a role in the future of automated advertising? What is the role of human beings? I mean, do we see a future where machines are making all the decisions, optimization decisions, creative decisions? Is that
I think
possible?
It's an interesting goal, and I think overall automation itself is something that is talked about across all industries outside of advertising today. I think we've got a long way to go before 2020 or 2022. Even based on existing technologies, you think about just automated call centers today and how incredibly frustrating and friction-full versus frictionless that environment is for most of our consumers. They just want to talk to a person. Yeah, perhaps. So I think we talked about in one of our work sessions that the necessary environment to be able to take advantage of some of these innovations is going to be better control and understanding of data, better management of it, understanding how to stitch it together in a way that actually enables you to draw insights. And then from there, you can start thinking about different ways of automating things. I would say that our analog structure today is massively imperfect. So how can we replace something and automate something that today is still full of error and inconsistency?
Isn't there, to get back to NBCU, were you going to say something?
I just think in most cases, automation always trails consumer attention, right? So with all of our largest segments, many of them from TV through connected TV and other areas where consumers are fragmenting to, they're the least automated. And so you're still going to need the human touch to innovate around those expanding channels. And I think there's a next step of automation in programmatic. Most media buying platforms still require the human trader to go in and essentially manifest a strategy in a set of placements. and packages and targeting. So there's a level up, which
Yep.
which companies, both agency and technology vendor, are getting to, which is bring the strategy, and we'll essentially create the campaign out of the strategy. So we can push the boundary on automation around the sets of channels that are programmatically enabled, but around things like over the top and other areas where we don't have automation, you need an extra level of human insight, development, and creativity to apply those with the rest of your media strategy.
And there's a difference between setting up like a programmatic audience and a buy, and then setting up a campaign that sort of optimizes offline and online and treats it like a portfolio, right?
Exactly.
And is that kind of automation in a way? Sort of smart campaign planning?
There's multiple evolutions to get to that end goal. So I think broadly defined, yes, it counts as automation, but it doesn't remove the human from the value chain.
Because there's some things you can automate, like print, right? I mean, maybe you could automate print planning, but not print execution, or out of home, like not digital out of home, but out of home. How do you do it at NBCU? You do both, right?
Yeah, so we have programmatic television as well as an offering. I think, it automates certain aspects of the workflow, but there's some fundamental infrastructure sort of elements that today cannot be automated, and we see that changing over the next 5 to 10 years as some of the broadcast technology gets digitized, and then we see the emergence of what we call virtual television platforms like a Hulu TV or YouTube TV. I think all of those sort of trends will lead to a world where television has capabilities that are more akin to what we can do in digital today. But in its current form, it's hard to get to that dynamic sort of ad insertion type world. One other point I wanted to add, just related to sort of the definition of automation, I think we talk about it today largely within the context of workflow and transactional automation, but I think the area that interests me the most is really the insights automation part of it, where we talk about artificial intelligence, and every company you talk to out there has a machine learning or artificial intelligence sort of component, and they have a cool name associated with it. But I think that's where I feel like the technology is certainly there. We now need the right skill sets deployed against it to drive more kind of automation of that insight generation piece. Because I think we're all awash in data, but we now need to apply the technology to actually derive some of those insights.
Well, can I give you an example and you tell me if this is what you mean? So I've always said that I'm very fanatical about a particular dog breed. People who know me know what this breed is. It's on my sock here. This is a Bernese Mountain Dog. Now, it's just a fact that if an ad contains a Bernese Mountain Dog, not only do I pay attention to it, because I love the Bernese Mountain Dog, but I actually like the brand more, because they have the taste, the class to put a Bernese Mountain Dog in their ad. Subaru did this, and it's literally true. So if an advertiser knew that about me, this fact, which is, obscure, they could really have very good leverage, and they could connect with me in a real way. Of course, if every brand did it, maybe it wouldn't mean anything, but I think everybody has something like that.
But I think that point is the right one, which is if every brand did it, then it wouldn't mean anything. And it's like,
It's a commodity.
as the products that a lot of brands and services, a lot of brands bring to market become easier to replicate because of technology. The points of difference are not as clear. It becomes a different conversation around brand values, not just brand assets. And I think when you get into that conversation, then it becomes where the rubber meets the road in terms of how automation works and how it doesn't work in really persuading someone to make a change.
And the authenticity associated with that for a brand, right? And really ensuring that we're using those opportunities to bring a brand's true purpose and meaningful role to bear in that story. I mean, I think you mentioned Subaru, right, with the Bernese Mountain Dog. I mean, for that particular story, that's a rugged type dog to be in that sort of message. So I think that I don't know, it just seems to make sense. But, I do think there's sort of there's going to be that fine line between a brand being seen as opportunistic through that type of, targeting and understanding the consumer, and a brand really sort of being very authentic to their role in the world and what that means to you, the consumer. Because I think, the consumer, their threshold for, sort of non-authentic,
Manipulation.
non-meaningful, being manipulated is really low. Yeah.
But isn't that what I think automation can help drive authenticity, right? By better targeting, right?
It can. I mean, I think that's
The
for
problem,
sure the opportunity.
The problem today is a lot of the creative that gets built gets served to the wrong audience, and that leads to that isn't authentic, right? So you could have much more of a micro economy inside advertising going forward because of automation, right? Which isn't really there today. We're getting there bit by bit, but we're still quite a long way from there.
Yeah.
I think on your statement earlier about the rise of automation, that we think 80% of it is going to be taken care of, but then the other 20% is actually still an opportunity around creativity and audience insights. What happens if no more investment happens on the audience insights and data and creative side and automation still continues to take off? Is that a dangerous place for all of us to be
You
in?
mean VC investment?
Yeah.
Marketer investment? Yeah.
Right, because if we don't get the audience insights that like Sharm was talking about, what are we going to do with all this automation?
The
Does it all just fall
opportunity,
apart?
Well, I've always said there's so much science going into the execution and targeting, and what are you actually delivering?
Correct.
What is that?
Who is it and what's the message? What are we doing in that space today to get to a point where we're all roads lead together in 2022, which is give me a promised land of.
But there's a whole piece of automation. At the end of the day, we all want to drive an outcome, and the advertising to sales piece is still muddy in between.
Yep.
So the more you can get to that, you've got to look at it as a creative process, but there's also an efficiency process. My heritage is PCs and computers. I've been there for 20 years. But there's literally guys looking at cost, control every single little widget that's in that product down to the cent. And I got to believe over time, the media and advertising industry will go the same way. It's not just about transparency. It's looking at the whole cost of your creative all the way through to hitting the customer, and where can you be efficient along that supply chain. I think that's where the industry's headed, and not allow investment in other areas.
Yeah, and I think just not to get ahead of us with measurement or transparency, but
No jumping ahead.
data by itself, I think we've noted this, is dumb. Data's dumb. People are smart. So you can create artificial intelligence, but it has to come from a place of human insight. And I think to the point of all the things we can even do today, you see a lot of marketers who, in doing an analysis of, I know expression I say a lot of the offices, is the juice worth the squeeze? How much cost and time and human calories and teams does it take me to set up the entire waterfall of dynamic creative and decisioning to drive an outcome? For some businesses, it's really important and it's crucial because there's a small pocket of really valuable consumers that you want to make sure that you reach. With others, you actually might be more effective, at least in the near term, until we stand up some of these technology-based solutions, doing mass media. And so I'm the digital guy in my agency, and I often will say, maybe we should do linear TV for this. And it's something that is, I think, part of, as you think about the future and innovation, we need to really kind of have a sort of art of the possible perspective. What could be done today, and then what do we want to look for tomorrow, but making sure that we're, managing things in the near term.
Well, I think Kelly's question is the right one with respect to our themes, right? One cannot succeed without the other two.
Correct.
They have to move in concert. And I think we've seen some reckoning recently with some of the announcements around large companies cutting spend and not having an impact on outcomes that proves that exact point. If we don't get transparency into some of the metrics that are key to driving the outcome and then the ability to measure that outcome based on those metrics, then we can have all the automation in the world, but it's not going to serve the marketer.
And thus the three themes come together.
Right.
Right here, automation, transparency, measurement. That was well done. Now there's one point I don't want to lose, which I think is fascinating. There is a thesis that in the future you can have insights and have no authenticity as a brand at all.
Yeah.
And just sort of create an ad that will manipulate whoever it is you're showing it to like your brand. So in other words, you don't really have an identity. You're what I might call an unbrand. And I'll be, liberal here, and I'll be conservative there, and I'll be a dog lover here and a cat lover there, and but that's not authentic, I don't think, in your use of the term. So what's to prevent that happening? That ideal data-driven future where the brand has no identity at all? I mean, in that world, is there such a thing as a brand? Well, first of all, do you think it's going to happen? And second of all, what does it mean for branding?
I think we've been proven time and time again that emotion is leading rational decision making as humans. And so as long as that happens, I think the world needs brands. Now, how those brands manifest, I think will change. But I think we assume that automation automatically means cannibalization of other things, when to me it just means a deviation on the path of a brand to look at it in a different way. And so I think it kicks up new opportunities to engage a customer, not a system that just runs on its own. Because I think anything that becomes formulaic is problematic over time.
Yeah, and I think
Consumer
it's
will notice.
Yeah, 100%. I vehemently believe that brands have more and more role the more technology comes into our world.
agree. And I think this idea of personalization, it's what we're here to talk about today, the future of advertising. So advertising was very, I will tell you about what my brand stands for and hope to make that emotional connection with you. Brands will still need to do that, but through this ability for a brand to do that in a way that's more personalized through automation, I think will continue to increase and can still be done in a relevant way.
Part of it is like Marshall McLuhan, you guys know him, thinker?
Yeah.
Medium is the message. So in the past, and really the media creates the message and it creates the response to the message. And in the past it was mass media, and in a way you had to have a brand identity because you're marketing to a lot of people, first of all, who are all very different, and they have to gravitate toward you as a brand, and you don't have control over individual messages, and maybe now you do. But Aubrey, what do you think, what does it mean to be authentic? I mean, is that in your work, and is that relevant for branding?
I mean, authenticity is key to what we do, especially if you look at, the history we've had with Revolt and some of the other companies within our portfolio at Combs Enterprises. We tend to market a lifestyle, and bringing that lifestyle to market means a different thing to different people. So when you have a huge database of content on one end, and you have a huge database of audience segments on the other end, how do you find that lightning in a bottle? You have a very limited amount of human resources. So I think what automation does is it empowers us. It doesn't really, conflict with the human resources. It actually empowers us to get to that lightning in a bottle faster. Yeah. I can put a wide variety of creative units against a wide variety of audience segments, and the machines will figure it out for us at scale. So I think it allows us to be authentic and find the authentic connection between the content and the audience in a much faster, more efficient, and effective way.
Can you tell us what Revolt does, by the way?
Sure. Revolt is the #1 name in music.
Okay.
We speak to millennials and Gen Z about music, the culture that surrounds it, and we help brands speak to emerging audiences in authentic ways. A lot of folks are looking to talk to Gen Z. Earlier this year, we released one of the most comprehensive Gen Z reports in this new engagement economy around how to really connect with them in authentic and meaningful ways.
Gen Z and millennials. I've heard of those. How do you feel about Gen X? No? Not so hot? Not interested. Okay. Just kidding. And the Combs, by the way, is Pete Diddy, right?
Sean Diddy Combs, yes.
Okay. So we're almost out of time on this topic. We, of course, could talk for weeks, and I think during Ad Week, we'll talk for a week about automation. But let's revisit the bold statement. So what was it again, Phil? Your bold
By
statement.
2022,
2022.
80% of today's quote-unquote advertising, processes will be automated.
Okay. And then as a group, how are we feeling? It looks like we felt pretty good, but there are a lot of nuances around that.
The obvious key dependency is TV.
TV.
Yeah.
And the underlying infrastructure that linear TV is based on today makes programmatic incredibly difficult. Ad Cloud TV with NBC brings a data-driven solution to that, but getting to a true self-serve, totally connected programmatic infrastructure with the existing base of linear TV is very challenging, which I think comes to where Sharm and our companies start to forecast the future around what is that crossover point of audience consumption between linear delivered TV and IP delivered.
It's not about technology. It's about customer consumption, right? So
which technology that customer is using and consume.
but we constantly underestimate how people change the way they interact with different things, right? So I would say, I'd be aggressive and I'd say we're grossly underestimating how fast people are going to cord cut. Right, grossly underestimating. So I've got, my 2 kids are 22, 25. They don't use anything other than, casting TV or watching TV on their phones. And so my argument today is that 10% that are doing this today are the most sophisticated user. I've looked at this personally, and I find it's still too difficult for the vast majority of people to switch from DVRs and locals. And as soon as that process becomes simpler, it's going to cascade and escalate so fast that we won't believe it's happening.
So
and then the technology behind it and infrastructure has to follow what customers are doing so fast, otherwise you lose revenue. So that's my
There's a
personal.
whole other argument. It might be subscription-driven then and not ad-driven, those businesses. In which case, it's the end of the advertising industrial complex. As
Well, maybe.
L2
I
says.
mean, you could have. I mean, you could.
Yeah.
You could be aggressive and say Netflix will have a pay advertising version and a paid subscription version. Who knows how business models change? Nothing stays the same.
Well, my prediction is it'd be like Facebook, you know, and originally they didn't want ads. They're not ads. They're making the world a better place. Everything's happy. And now look at it. It's
Well, now did Google.
ad
right?
company. Okay, so we have to move on, guys. This is excellent. 2025 television, linear television, all addressable. 2025, that was your date?
2022.
2022, what do you think?
No, not all.
2022, not yet?
Not all.
Okay. Getting there?
Getting there.
50%?
It's 35 billion in addressable TV by 2022. I mean, I think there's a lot of people sitting around this table will have much better businesses if it's 20 or 25%.
Okay.
And in 5 years, I agree with Gary, it's going to happen fast, but we're talking about a battleship to turn.
Yeah.
So 25% programmatic in 5 years, some version of programmatic. Yeah, I mean, we're $1 billion of 70 right now.
There's many components to that supply chain that aren't sort of tied to that last mile delivery, right? Which is the most challenging part. And I think there's a lot that automation can offer in terms of increasing productivity in areas tied to the customer and servicing the customer better and freeing up sort of resources from doing sort of hands-on keyboard type activities. And so I think that's part of that projection is like, we'll take a lot of the work that today doesn't, is not driving significant value for the customer and automate that so that the resources can focus on higher value activity. And so there's a lot, I think, that can be done before you get to the point where you can dynamically serve an ad into every, device or surface out there.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. America really wants to hear about transparency. By the way, that figure that Keith was alluding to, 35 billion. So this year was the year when digital overtook television in terms of ad spend in the US. I don't think globally, but it's getting there. 70 billion in linear television spend and 70 billion in digital, which includes search. So we can talk about that if that really counts. But it's kind of a milestone. I can remember when I started Digitas, 2004, and digital was probably 7% of budgets. I mean, it was nothing. It was very small. And television was 80%, so writing was on the wall even then. Okay, so switching gears a bit, transparency. Now, transparency has a lot of levels, which we'll get to. Our ABLE team has been brainstorming on this for hours, has some mind-blowing ideas. Originally, when I saw transparency, I thought immediately of kind of botnet fraud, fraudulent impressions, pixel stuffing, all that stuff, domain spoofing. But then there's also transparency in the supply chain of programmatic, like who am I buying from, what am I paying? Around the cost. There's no real invoicing in programmatic, so there's not a lot of transparency there. And then, so is it viewed by a human? Who am I buying it from? And then on the auction side, it's like, am I in a first price auction, a second price auction? Some geeks out there will know exactly what I'm talking about, and there's all kinds of games that are being played. So really, the sky's the limit here, and I look forward to hearing what the team came up with, and we'll hand it over to
Thank you.
Keith.
So it's a topic that can go in a myriad of directions. And so to simplify it and sort of frame it, we thought of delivery transparency and economic transparency to the points you were alluding to, Marty. So with delivery transparency is where was the ad delivered, who was it seen by, and some set of metrics that associate value to that exposure. And with economic transparency, it's, all right, along the set of touch points in the value chain to go from the creative through the technology to the publisher or whatever value chain is delivering that ad, exactly how much did I pay for it at the end point and what were the takes along the way. So if we start with delivery transparency, we've essentially had a currency of impressions and cost based off the ad server for going nearly 20 years now. And I think based on some of the things like viewability and fraud, those two metrics have become insufficient to extract value out of a campaign. And so we're moving into, through a number of third-party technologies, measures of viewability, time exposed. Yes, it was a human being that saw this. So I think there's an interesting debate around, do we need a currency beyond cost and impression count? And we would argue, one prediction was another currency will emerge that is a level up from those base metrics that ties more closely to marketing outcomes. On the economic side, I think quickly riffing off automation, the reality is automation has taken a lot of costs out of the system, right? I mean, very roughly 10 years ago, brands worked with agencies who worked with ad networks at 50% margins, right? And so automation has...
Those were good times.
Those were, for some people, not for brands.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, as an agency person.
Not for agencies either, actually.
We can
On our margins.
It's true. So automation has, repurposed the resources and focused them on higher value things. I think many people would argue the automation of planning has enabled us to do things, empowered data and audience in a way that humans probably couldn't have done so. But as we've brought automation to the fore, we've created all these hops in the value chain. And Will's really insightful point was, it's okay to have hops, but the cost of those hops have to be creating greater value at the end point of the impression delivery. So it's not bad to pay the third-party viewability vendor 5 cents CPM or the fraud detection or pre-bid blocking company 2 cents CPM, as long as in your collective strategy and investment, you feel like ROI is being created as a result. Because at the end of the day, all of our audiences are on digital. We have to lean into digital, but we have to do it in a way that it's not just for the sake of automation. We're tying these three things together and pulling out ROI from our investment in digital.
So what's the bold prediction?
So we haven't got to walled gardens yet.
Oh, no. Walled gardens. And just some of you out there, so just a couple of clarifying points. So he's talking about cost per impression, so it's CPM. So it's basically you take all the money you spent and you figure out how many impressions you got and then sort of do some division, and that's the currency. And that's sort of like television. But then viewability, the ComScore would say half the ads aren't seen, so does that really count? You paid for something, nobody saw it, so then the thought was, well, we'll just think in terms of what was seen, and then was it seen by a human? So.
Exactly. So with the respect to the walled gardens, we have 70% of digital investment.
What are walled gardens, by the way?
So walled gardens are large companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others that have an incredibly scaled set of media properties and an incredibly scaled set of unique data. And the walled term refers to the fact that the data and its ability to be activated on that media stays within the walls of those particular companies. And with 70% of investment on digital going to either Facebook or Google, the vaunted duopoly, marketers have a significant hurdle to get over in terms of extracting understanding of ROI when so much of their investment goes to those two places, where audience exposure and individual impression data is severely limited in terms of the marketer understanding who they reached and how those people interacted with it. But the world is changing. Even those companies have become more open to third-party measurement around viewability and other aspects. And we have a third walled garden rising rapidly, which is Amazon, which has a set of data that's particularly of interest to brands.
About to move to New York, I hear.
A large set of media, possibly, or Raleigh. And with that rise, I think it's going to introduce a new set of competitive dynamics to the media landscape and potentially force Facebook and Google to open up their user ID graph to marketers and let them better measure their exposure across those different media properties.
Well, help me understand that one. So does that mean, so I'm a brand and I'm attracted to Amazon, I will move money out of Facebook potentially if they're not sharing data with me, and I'll move it over to
Exactly. I mean,
Amazon.
if brands can't get a holistic understanding of which walled garden is more impactful for their particular marketing objective, then they're going to be challenged to understand which one is most effective and move dollars accordingly. And if the purchase and shopping data of Amazon proves too compelling to consumers, that without better understanding of the impact of Facebook and Google, dollars may disproportionately flow there, and I think Facebook and Google will react to that.
There was a study that I saw from Kenshu that said that 72% of people who buy a product, any e-commerce platform, at some point go to Amazon to check out the product. So that's a lot of searching. And then half of product searches begin in Amazon. So for a certain kind of marketers, Amazon has a lot of power, a lot of intent data.
Exactly.
But maybe not other verticals.
Possibly not.
Were you going to say something?
No.
Sorry. The one thing you said earlier I want to go back to.
Sure.
And we have to get back to Amazon, but it's sort of like, it's a little dangerous. So let's put that off for 1 second. But you talk about an alternative metric, which is very intriguing. And I know, like Financial Times, for instance, is talking about an engagement metric, which is some combination of how much time somebody spent, I guess, with an ad. It could be time-based, not necessarily. Any kind of motion that they made around the ad. Or I know Facebook at one time had an experiment where if you kind of were scrolling and paused a bit on an ad, that's a sign of engagement.
Right.
What might that look like? I mean, and how would that work?
I think the caveat is that everybody on the brand and agency side and the smart players on the technology side are trying to close the loop and drive to actual sales outcome. But in many cases, that's not possible. So we back up the value chain to other proxy metrics. I don't think it's a terribly profound statement to say, I'm going to move from a CPM-based currency to a cost per viewable currency, because if no one saw the ad, and maybe it's a cost per viewable human currency. If no one saw the ad and it wasn't a human being, then why is it even in my denominator of total exposed impressions? And there is a fragmented set of technology vendors that do that today, which makes it a challenge to become a currency. But nonetheless, if you're a marketer, that is your starting point. I delivered an ad to a human being and they had the opportunity to see it. And if I'm not paying based on those things, then I'm starting from the wrong point.
At a minimum, that's the requirement. I think, as an agency partner who we use our clout to push publishers to align to these standards, we do have sympathy, I think, for the how different it is from agency to agency, from client to client in terms of the technology used. There is some significant variance between the way that each technology scores certain types of this outcome. So it's an additional burden on the publishers. So we're very sympathetic to that. I think if we could ever find a way to get to a more consistent, unified basis, and I think, frankly, any sort of softening up in the position of the walled gardens would help us. Having one standard, third-party accredited means of measurement is something that I think all agencies would be excited about, and I think it'd ultimately be a cleaner way of representing outcomes to clients. I wanted to pick back up, though, on your topic of engagement. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that still remains, and hopefully the measurement sort of work stream will cover off on some of this, we don't necessarily know today, or I don't think we have rich quantitative data that supports how much engaging with a specific piece of communication is going to necessarily drive to a specific revenue-driving outcome, right? So an actual sales event. And I'm a huge believer in content and a huge believer in brands being able to create environments with lots of content around their experience and their ethos and who they are. However, connecting the dots from a measurement framework between brand lift studies and other types of sort of panel-based information, and at the end of the day, what Gary cares the most about, getting those Lenovo's out in people's desks, there's a gap. And I don't think we as an industry have bridged it. I think analytics and measurement and data together, that's the place that makes all of the rest of this innovation stuff, it's sitting fallow until you resolve that first.
Is the sort of the, on the simple question, simple, not so simple, of viewability and human viewable, sophisticated traffic and outright fraud, is that getting better over time? In other words, is the whole, programmatic ad space cleaner than it was last year, 2 years ago?
I think it's vastly more measurable.
More measurable,
Right?
okay.
And the fact that it's being measured and directly impacts the bottom line of publishers creates behavior change. Right? And so this is essentially become a de facto currency without a single measurement
You mean
provider.
viewability.
Exactly. And so publishers have reacted to that for obvious reasons. But the ad industry and brands and publishers can talk about viewability till the cows come home. It doesn't really change how consumers engage with content. Yep. Right. So consumers are going to start a YouTube video, click over to another tab, listen to the audio of the ad. The audio of the ad's going to end, and then they're going to hear the audio of their content playing, and they're going to tap back. Like that is human behavior. So the idea that we're going to get to 100% viewability is not theoretically realistic.
Not realistic. Yeah.
So we all have to operate with that understanding that we're trying to essentially systematize human behavior. So yes, it's gotten better. It has changed behavior of publishers. Publishers have reworked their pages to make things more viewable. I think we've dramatically reduced the ad, 3 pages down below the fold that's auto playing with the sound off and looping. We've tackled most of that, though it still happens too often. So it's been progress, but we still got a ways to go.
You'd be surprised if you scroll down a lot of pages. There's a lot going on down there.
There is.
So, okay, so in terms of the hops, like the take rate, so there's a lot of players in between. You mentioned a couple, like viewability vendor. I think we can all agree that's good, and is it human?
Third-party data.
But what about all kinds of third-party data? There's the SSPs, there's the exchanges that you're going, there's all the header wrappers, and how can that become more transparent? The behind-the-scenes tech infrastructure and what it's taking out.
Well, I think the industry would do itself a favor to put more of that on the table for clients to help them understand it. I think education is really important. Clients deserve to know where their money's going. But I think we should, I think what we've got through in the last year of transparency is a bit of a fair discussion around value creation. And I think that's what we alluded to earlier. The various hops themselves and the fact that we have an auction, all ads are auctions. We don't see all of that decision making that occurs within the behind the veil of a large publisher. So I think now that's become unbundled. And truthfully, I think as long as the juice is worth the squeeze, and when you stack all of those costs together, it drove a specific outcome for business, then it should be an acceptable one. I think the clients, as they take more control of their own data, might need to rely less on third-party data sources, and I think you see a lot of movement in the industry towards that end. But I do think that seeing clarity in the waterfall and having a fair discussion about it, certainly as a partner who works with agencies, it's a priority for us, and I think that you'll see more of that in time to come.
Didn't you guys have another prediction around arbitrage?
Yes.
In the end of arbitrage? What was that one? Who's your third member, by the way?
It's me.
Arbitrage.
Well,
Pro or con?
I think more of it's just
You love it.
more and more is going to move into private marketplaces. Right?
Private marketplace?
And I think the auction business will become a smaller and smaller part of the business, right? I think the issue with that is today the planning tools don't do a good job of looking into private marketplaces and how to apply your campaigns properly. So that's a big gap, right? If you're sitting down on a system and you want to plan that whole campaign out, the audience has got to be inside the private marketplaces to allow you to do that. But I think the level of fraud and all the issues we've had around open exchange, that's going to be seen as the place where it's the most riskiest place. So if you want to take some risks, you can go and do it, but there's going to always be drawbacks to that. So I think it'll get smaller. You're already seeing that in the video business, right? Some of the videos tipped around where it's 60 to 70% more video is private versus open exchange now.
Can someone explain to our audience what a private marketplace is and how that differs from the open exchange? Because not everyone's in the programmatic space.
Sure.
It says Adweek. Yeah, go ahead.
Especially because I think the private focus, to touch on both what Gary and Will just said, has been a core part of our strategy, and where we've invested is continuing to maintain that direct relationship with the customer so that we can have the conversation about measurement, about metrics directly. And then the pipes, there's automation and pipes that can fulfill them, right? Programmatic often is synonymous with indirect, and sort of that's an element of demand that can come through. But really, like when we think about private marketplace, it's very much akin to a one-to-one relationship between the buyer and seller at the sort of the macro level, and then the fulfillment is done via programmatic pipe. So it's happening on a real-time basis, but it functions akin to like a campaign. The open marketplace is the environment where there's more indirect sources of demand. So there's more layers between the buyer and the seller at that point in time. And so even within an open market context for NBCU, we're very cautious about where we make our inventory available, right? And so we've really limited it to certain pools of inventory where we felt like the liquidity that an open market provides lent itself to our inventory being there. But There's initiatives underway right now like ads.text, which is something the IAB is pushing for, which we are in the process of adopting, where it really makes it very clear. Think of it as like the authorized reseller sort of seal of approval, where we are stating very publicly, these are the places that you can buy NBC Universal, and these are the IDs associated with those places. And so if you don't see that, then that's probably not our inventory that you're buying. And so I think for us, private or like the direct-to-customer relationship has been core to programmatic. It's just another tactic as part of all these other tactics that they're utilizing when they buy from us.
Is there any argument that in future there's no open RTV? That it's all private marketplace deals?
I think you have to think about what made this whole ad tech explosion come into play over the course of the last decade or so anyway, which is a total oversupply of inventory. So the idea of being able to say this impression actually isn't worthless, it's not remnant, it's not throwaway, it's actually an analyst
And a real
partner, and we need to put this message in front of him because he likes this particular type of dog, right? So the ability to use data to help understand what the value of those impressions are, that's what drove all of this venture capital money in the first place. It's one of the reasons I think why there's inertia in a resistance to transference into the linear space, because there is no similar supply, oversupply state. Like billions of dollars change hands with a handshake, every year. So I think, to get back to the point of your question, like, I think there's always, until there is some dramatic change in volume of impressions, or some explosion in the ability to apply measurement to everything, there'll always be some sort of remnant
There'll always
marketplace.
be something that needs to be traded in open.
I mean, if you look at I was just thinking about the hotel model, a large part of that has moved to
Perfect
buying
example.
direct hotels, right? You know what you're buying, but I think it's on Priceline. If you can go and buy a hotel, but you don't actually know where you're staying, or an airline, you don't know what airline you're going to be.
Great metaphor.
So it's a similar thing that'll be around, but I think it'll get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, there is. It's a sliding scale between transparency and opacity and price and value. So it's all related.
But
And
there's-
if you
Sorry to interrupt. There's
Go
one
ahead.
other strata of inventory, which is the one premium publisher to many advertisers. And I think it's a little unrealistic to think that outside of the largest broadcasters in the world, we're going to create 300 or 400 private marketplaces to scale a campaign inside and a media buying platform. So one thing we do is contract with 100, 150 of the best publishers in the world, and then make those available to many advertisers, such that they don't need to sign a one-to-one deal, but they have access on a whitelist basis, completely transparent to those premium publishers. And it is as easy as adding another ad exchange to their campaign. They can go pick your broadcaster to your campaign without going through the contractual process, just to improve the velocity of automation and scale across a set of inventory that they're attracted to.
So you're buying an audience base rather than just
You're buying an audience base across
buyer
a
base.
scaled set of premium publishers.
Probably with higher degrees of visibility, not viewability, but visibility of URL transparency and other types of qualifiers for the inventory.
But you talk about the inertia of, you do a handshake and billions change hands. I think you've got to look at where the pipes are changing of delivery, right?
fair.
So we've got Google Fiber, we've got Ting going in, and you can get all that media is coming through completely different pipe. I don't need a satellite box or a satellite in the air. It's all coming through a different pipe. That changes the dynamics of all of this, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a place for what Keith described, which is sort of the curated private marketplace, because what open marketplaces provide, or historically have provided, is scale, right? So you're going after a very, very specific target audience, and that used to be the only avenue by which you could reach that audience at a meaningful enough scale. And so now as we look to aggregate private type inventory, premium publisher inventory, in an environment that now you know exactly what you're buying, you know the full set of publishers that you're buying from, it's high quality inventory, there's an opportunity to sort of rebuild some of that scale from the ground up almost, but now with the measurement and the rule sets and all sort of pre-built into it, as opposed to the open marketplace, which is a little bit
Yeah, I
better.
mean, be provocative and says you don't need people to go and plan your supply anymore, right? So the traditional method is
what was that?
you don't need people to plan your supply anymore. So the old model is you have someone there having breakfast and lunches every week and trying to understand all the supply pipes and then put a plan together.
Yeah.
It's already built into the systems for you, right? To go and pre-book all of this, right? You might, and it's hopefully in a trustworthy fashion, so the job function changes over time. It's not the old model of supply planning. That's done by the machine now.
You have the access,
Okay.
but you still need a planner.
You still
Right,
need a
the channel
planner,
plan,
but it's a
right.
different way that you go and plan your,
Yeah,
your,
right.
your supply.
Right.
So we touched on earlier, and there's no good spot in these three to put it, but the walled gardens and the rise of Amazon, and it seems like we should touch on Amazon. I think it's a hot topic, and they have entered advertising pretty aggressively, and they're building out teams here in New York, probably not far from us. So an example of that is, Alexa. You go to search on Alexa. You're like, Alexa, I need some batteries. And she's like, I have Amazon batteries. You're like, I want some Duracells. Like, I have Amazon batteries. Does that change the search experience? Maybe. And also, Amazon will have its own properties, and it has great intent data. I know it's just early stages, in essence, to what
I think
Amazon's going to do, but
part of
everyone
the
thinks it's
question
going to be
is,
another.
Will there be a search experience? Is there a choice point if you
Yeah.
continue down the road? And then what does that mean for brands when it's a whole different environment of conversation?
You mean voice, like if it's all voice?
If it's
Right.
voice AI and
Yeah.
you go through Alexa and you say reorder batteries and she defaults to either what Amazon recommends or your chosen brand of choice, now I'm at a point where at least I had an open market where I could make decisions before. If I go over to that, then search becomes a skipped metric in that experience. So then I think you have to redefine how you're looking at it.
Yeah, but I don't think
Is
search
that-
will go completely. I think what you're going to see is voice and screen, right? So Alexa's typically today is a box here, but it's going to be part of your screen technology. You'll probably see search results that come up from voice activation, right? So I don't think it'll just purely be voice, but voice might be the first starter for all of this, which dislocates some of the media chain that we've got.
Well, there's two elements. One is voice replacing typing, which seems inevitable. And
Right.
even now, when you do analytics, you want a dashboard like tell me sales on the West Coast or whatever. You can speak those into Google Analytics, and you don't have to type it or whatever. So that's one element. And the other one, I think, what you're talking about here is sort of the elimination of choice. It's hopping right from the intent to the product with nothing in between. And I wonder, though, will a consumer, maybe for a battery, all right, I don't really care. But I'm not going to tell Alexa, I need a luxury vehicle, and just bring one to my house. I don't know.
Although Amazon has a very good case study they did with a automotive partner on that.
Yes.
Bring me a luxury vehicle?
Not a luxury vehicle, but a vehicle. Big
And they
content
didn't
play.
care.
Comes back to branding, doesn't
The
it?
end
Yep.
of brands.
Yep.
Well, we had a keynote speaker at our event who made the point that brands are dead, essentially, which I suppose is one argument.
Well, there's a
I
new
find that hard
new
to believe.
e-commerce company. Someone can remind me of the name that is
Unbrand?
Brandless, yeah.
brandless.
Yes.
I think $3 for everything. So
Brandless, yeah.
completely brandless, frictionless e-commerce model, same price, super simple, aimed at millennials.
Convenience play, yeah.
And
Isn't it
doing
like those
very
stores, though, like Dollar General,
Like
where
Dollar
you go
General.
in and it's all generic?
It's just the online segment of Dollar General.
And brandless is a brand.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Good point.
I do think that, you're right. There's going to be a lot of screens, but we were talking about, I think that voice AI is the easiest, most acceptable first form of AI, that people feel like they're still in control of that. And I think that it's a gateway drug to a lot more where you don't have to make decisions. Most certain things will happen if you agree to certain opt-ins.
Right.
And then there'll be certain things you care about. The biggest guys in retail are the guys that had no brick and mortar stores, right? So
Yeah.
Bonobos is down the street, Amazon and Whole Foods, Amazon on its own, and bookstores. Bookstores were dead 5 years ago. Now they're the hottest thing, So I think that it's really important to think about retail as showroom and then what that means as a brand back to then the selling experience.
Yeah, it's because it's convenience, right, for the consumer. And as we know, time is the most precious commodity, right? So depending on what it is, and I think some of these use cases are very much a convenience angle for the consumer. It buys them more time so that they can also, like automation, right? The role of automation for them is it allows them to focus on what really matters in their life, right? And so it's going to be interesting. I think the other thing that Amazon we'll bring into the discussion is propensity, which will lead to more convenience for the consumer. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves.
It's interesting too, these gardens, it's like they know a lot about each of us, a lot, but it's something different. Like Facebook knows a lot about me personally, actually, but Amazon really doesn't. All they know is kind of what I buy. But they could
basket.
infer things, I guess, suppose, from the titles I'm looking at, but it's a different data set, and then Google.
And what a
something else
lookalike
as well.
audience like you is doing, right? So to infer more.
There's no doubt it's a lot of data, but you almost need all three to
Yeah,
kind of
right.
put together a plan. So. So we're almost out of time here. Any other thoughts on transparency? The hot topic of last year at Adweek? We're getting to the hot topic of this year.
What was the bold prediction?
Oh, what was the bold prediction?
Going down?
The bold prediction
Arbitrage?
was
No.
that's the sub prediction. The bold prediction was by 2022, the Facebook and Google duopoly will open up their user ID graph to greater, more holistic measurement because of the entry of Amazon.
But not totally. They'll hold back a little.
Probably.
Okay.
Probably.
You heard it here, everybody. 2022?
2022.
Just like your, okay, excellent. So we are now going to move to my favorite, which is measurement. And measurement is always, and today as well, the last thing done in the presentation when you go into the client pitch. You're like, here's the great creative, here's the excellent media plan, and by the way, here's how we're going to measure it. Oh, no time. Oh, sorry, we got to go. That was my job, so I actually never got to present anything 'cause I was at the end. But it's moved up the value chain now, and often, if you don't lead with measurement,
should be
the
first.
client feels like you don't know what you're talking about, and you're not delivering value. So it's great. I mean, all of a sudden, we became data scientists overnight and became very cool. So measurement is really, on a simple level, it's just trying to tell what advertising's doing. And really, if we think about advertising, what is it trying to do? It's trying to make people do something, take an action, or change the way they think. It's a perception of a brand, which I suppose in the future will lead to them doing something, like buying something. So it's really those two things. It's thinking and doing it. And then the whole C, like, were they exposed? So there's a lot of dimensions here. And we will get into AI. I'm sorry. Has it taken us this long to mention it? Did it come up before? No.
Automation.
We can automate it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sprinkled in.
A little
yeah.
bit.
We held off.
Alexa.
Best for last. So we have our measurement team, and our leader is Jill.
So I'll kick it off. Worked with Aubrey and Kelly discussing measurement. So as you just said, measurement really, really matters. It goes beyond advertising, really everything that we do from a marketing standpoint. We want to see, is it working? I think the challenge is, sometimes as we talked about, we don't actually know how to get there, right? So, the current state for measurement is sometimes we measure what we can measure, not what we need to measure, right? And so, the things that we're measuring today are, how many views did we get? How many impressions did we make? How many fans do we have, right? The whole sort of, vanity metrics that we have. It's, really getting closer to how far down the funnel, right, is that taking them, so I know how effective that is. What is an impression on one channel versus another channel actually mean for me as far as what I'm trying to get the customer to either do, buy something, or feel. And so I think, we feel like we're at a moment where what's going to happen with the measurement is that we're going to have an ambition and a shift to move away from some of these more transactional measurements to those that are a bit more indicative of this sort of emotional connection, sort of really getting to the psychology behind the consumer and really getting to that why, because it's going to be, based on everything we just talked about, that much more important for brands to be able to differentiate themselves and actually stand out with consumers who are, voting with their, not only with their wallet, but with their time and attention, and sort of opting in for convenience. And so we talked about what this really means. What it really means is that I think brands that are going to continue to be relevant are brands that are actually going to tell less and rely on these sort of tell metrics and actually do more, right? So this shift from sort of storytelling to story doing, so you're actually living your brand. And we think that really matters because, audiences are looking for, particularly these younger audiences that we mentioned, millennials and Gen Z, they want purpose in their life, right? And they're looking for brands who can actually help them get that purpose. So we think that's sort of a set. So brands will tell us and do more. brands will enable those communities to actually feel like they're achieving real meaning in their lives. And what that means is that we're actually going to have to understand those audiences in a much richer way. So it's moving beyond the demographics to more of the psychographics, and really sort of getting to that underlying psychology. So sort of riding the wave of what you just shared, which was this huge investment in data science and data analytics to, sort of the very aggressive push towards the psychology behind that and really getting to know these consumers on a very intimate level. I mean, I think, this is something at National Geographic, which was, sort of one of the original purpose-led brands who's been at sort of, going out in the world and driving and defining sort of a purpose-built role for 130 years that we're thinking a lot about, which is how do we actually bring the consumer into that so they can sort of be a part of this work that we're doing, and it's a big leap and a big stretch. So we have so that's sort of the context, I think, for everything we talked about, and then Kelly, you'll walk us through our bold
I had a
prediction.
question,
Okay.
If I could ask Aubrey,
Sure.
I'm intrigued by this tell and do.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
Tell versus do.
Yeah.
So there's communicating with a
Yeah.
brand message, what your company's all about. And then there's literally helping or empowering, which I think is a better word, our audiences to actually successfully pursue some of the purposes that are meaningful to them, right? A lot of technology is available now through social to help empower these connections and drive people from a place of passively just consuming the message to really getting involved actively. I'll give you an example. Revolt Music Conference. Once a year, we get a few thousand folks in Miami to learn, to network, and to celebrate music. This is above and beyond.
Who are these people?
These are
Customers?
music fans. They're not necessarily subscribers of Revolt. In some cases they are. But this is a greater purpose. This is a bigger calling that the Revolt brand has taken on to help encourage more learning, more networking, more empowerment socially. So now, instead of us just worrying about television subscribers, we're focused on spreading this message, not just in Miami, but taking the technology, the virtual experience, and going to scale with that, which really resonates with our audience. These Gen Z folks, they're really adamant about their purpose in life. And how does a brand effectively help empower that while still focusing on the business? That's part of it. I think what we're also seeing is this evolution of data insights and intelligence. So, I would say even a year ago, our insights team would talk about the shift in culture and how we have to be a bit more subjective with our advertising and marketing efforts. Understood, but
Subjective.
But I look at it as more objectivity based on the data that's available.
Okay.
So now, if we know the psychographics about our audience, we know what schools they like, what sports they like. It's deeper than just demographic data. It's deeper than male, female, college income,
Age.
College household income, age, etc. So how do we take all of this nuance that comes with psychographics? There's a ton of data around it, and actively use that to drive behavior, and drive it in a way that's meaningful, that's above and beyond your transaction, because Gen Z, they're not just about your transaction, right? It's a different age of marketing. How do we have integrity with our brand voice? How do we not just tell the story, but be the story, live the story in what the company is doing in the marketplace?
And I think what we talked about was it's really, and it sounds kind of trite, but it's really fostering community in these tribes that matter to people, right? And sort of sort of bringing like-minded people together who want to find meaning and who are searching for that purpose-driven role with other like-minded people. And then how do you sort of do that in an intimate way, but then use that content and those ambassadors to actually drive scale around that community and that sense of belonging to that community?
Yeah, we even had a term called social diffusion, and it was all about
Social diffusion.
social diffusion. So it's all about our ambassadors.
Sounds like the title of a NWA album. Or I'm dating
Not quite.
myself. Yeah.
But it's really about identifying those ambassadors, like she said, that can be evangelists for the brand and make meaningful connections personally with our audience, and doing that at scale.
This leads nicely into Kelly's work, which
Yeah.
I've wanted to, and this actually, by the way, is not the usual conversation around measurement. Usually we talk about multi-touch attribution, media mix modeling, and journey analytics, and are we doing logistic regression or game theory? But this
Into
may be more
aspirational
interesting.
place. Yeah.
We did.
You're doing some really interesting stuff. You have a content lab, and first of all, could you just say what you do,
Sure.
and then move into your bold prediction?
I head up Get Creative, which is our in-house nationwide creative agency within USA Today Network. And so we work directly with advertisers to create content. It could be articles, videos, and even virtual reality, which has been a lot of our recent work, and really helping brands connect with our audience in a way that is more authentic and builds more of an experience instead of just storytelling. Particularly with VR, obviously, and we believe that this is a part of the future, fully immersive experience, which is obviously like all the work that all of us were doing over the last 2 days, really looking at how do you build a brand into an experience. And if you think about the word experience, it's truly human. That means senses. That means you have to see something, feel something, touch something, taste something. And we have to be able to measure that. If that's the only point of differentiation, we have to move away from the transactional that Jill was talking about into the value-based. And so our bold prediction was by 2022, apparently everybody likes 5 years out.
Big year.
That
A little safer.
it is. We debated between 2020 and 2025, so we landed in the middle. Deep human insights is the evolution of data science. So it replaces what data science is today. So what that looks like is that venture capitalist investments increase into technologies that can accurately measure human emotion and sentiment, and that agencies, brands, and publishers alike will all have teams of psychologists on staff, just like they suddenly hired data scientists over the past 5 years to really take on understanding of what is that human connection, what is the emotion, and how does that then translate into the creation of brand experience and advertising as a whole. Definitely in new areas like VR, where you can measure like biofeedback and brainwaves and retina scans, you can do this. But how do we take all that and change that into like an actual human emotion and to shape that brand? So we were a little bit bigger picture. It's a lot to accomplish.
Theoretically, I get you, but the issue with brand is always measuring the impact of brand advertising in particular is it's difficult. Today we're limited to. I mean, you can look at organic search volume. Does it go up and do a survey essentially?
Yeah.
Ask people, did you see this ad? How do you feel about the brand?
Right.
and do a little social listening, I guess. But what would this look like?
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I mean, obviously, like
trying to get in-
VR has the best application because you're actually putting something on your body, and you can scale that, what that looks like, how people are reacting to it. And we're definitely a ways off for every single person. Although I did just read recent prediction by 2021, 100 million headsets sold, which is
In the U.S.
in
Global.
the U.S.
U.S.
Which is a big jump, and certainly
There's only
this-
300 million people in the U.S.
Yeah, and that's why it's a big jump. But you can think about that. That's a fully immersive experience. Brands can tell stories, create whole experiences within that we can then measure and bring back.
So there's a feedback loop.
Well, a piece
Right.
we didn't talk about either was social. So social listening becomes different then too. And it's not just social listening within platforms, it's actually hearing your customers.
Yeah.
Almost in an old school way of how they interact with your brand, how that changes over time. Are they buying new products that they otherwise wouldn't because you're able to tell stories in different ways?
Right.
Is there any value to social listening?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
Your audience, your customer is telling you something. You should absolutely listen.
I think there'll be an
Okay.
evolution with sentiment analysis too. You
Yeah.
know, in the world of social in particular.
Yeah.
A lot of the enterprise level software available today is still in beta for sentiment analysis. So I think in the years to come, we'll see some evolution there, and we'll get closer to this world that we're predicting.
AI, I know, is good at recognizing imagery. So I suppose if you can bring imagery into the equation, like the pictures people put up as well as the words that they're using,
Yeah.
that would inform the conversation.
Well, if more
But
and
it's a
more,
limited volume of data, though, isn't
more
it?
and more time is spent on on a phone, and you've got
Phone,
facial
yeah.
recognition technology already built into phones, which is only going to improve. I would have thought. How far are you away from tying facial recognition and imagery into the phone experience?
Yeah.
The
Then it
sentiment
becomes a privacy
associated.
discussion, right?
Yeah.
But
Facial expression.
you
Right.
could well tie a lot of the phone engagement to facial recognition technology. So the question is, where do you bound the lines on privacy and
Right.
data,
Yeah.
and
Opt-in.
how does that all transform itself?
You
Well, before we
mentioned-
get to privacy, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say you mentioned search query volume of people looking for your brand.
Yeah.
Okay, they're looking for your brand, but what are they looking for and how are they talking about you? Are they recommending you to somebody? Those things to me mean a lot more than just somebody typing in my brand name.
Is,
I think there's a stop in our measurement evolution, right? We have still failed miserably on measuring the
Correct.
impact of branding on sales outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you think about Gary's business,
failed miserably, Keith says.
we have,
True.
as an industry, and I throw everybody in the ecosystem in that. But if you think about Gary's business, Lenovo has built a great brand, but can they tie the customer journey from their Kobe Bryant commercials all the way down to their e-commerce
sale.
transaction? And they can't because their media is fragmented through 5 different channels. So I mean,
Not more.
if probably much more. So I mean, tying the things together again. I mean, automation enables the consolidation of media, which enables more holistic measurement. So multi-touch attribution actually makes sense as opposed to the black box odd signals it puts out today. So I think
Nice.
the ecosystem has to tackle that challenge and then layer on psychological sentiment and other things which are really important to the brand managers. But again, may be a leap from the actual tie out with the sales outcome.
So you're saying, if I can rephrase, digitization and automation will allow more user-level data collection, so we'll know what ads people are seeing, and
Along
then we
the
can
customer
use
journey.
along the journey, and then if we can tie that to an outcome using identity, so someone bought something, maybe it's next year, whenever,
Right.
we can use analytics essentially to figure out what drove what.
Exactly.
So it's applying a multi-touch attribution across the entire advertising ecosystem.
I mean, it is, but what is the vision of AdCloud and a few other buying platforms? It's
That's fair.
to put all the ad opportunities in the world behind them,
Yep.
such that one, you can bring a strategy and have AI deliver the outcome, and that because you've got consolidated media buying, you can measure it much more holistically than is possible today. And will we get there in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? We will see, but I think every month we can make a dent in the quality of measurement that's possible across the customer journey.
So we're getting closer, but there's still a need for proxy metrics.
There are.
Say, yes.
No, there absolutely are.
Okay. Now there's a couple points. So privacy, I don't know, maybe too much for us to handle today. Consumer privacy, very important. We're on record. Okay. I want to talk at the moment about two things. We're near the end here, and we want to thank you for joining us. We're live, by the way, from the offices of McGarry Bowen on 26th Street in New York, and we have industry thought leaders talking about the future of advertising. So two things that are maybe a little bit lighter, but nonetheless very interesting to me. Number one, we'll get to branded content in a moment. I think that's very interesting. But what about celebrities? Do celebrities have a role in advertising in the future? Is their role diminished? Is it different? Or is it non-existent?
How are we defining celebrity?
Good question.
That's a good question.
I turn
Expert
to you.
content.
Yes.
Expert content. If you're reading the data, it's more effective than branded content or user-generated content. And if we look at celebrities, whether they be athletes or entertainers, fans and audiences worldwide look to them as experts to some extent in whatever field they may, whatever profession they've become successful in. So I think there's definitely a role for celebrity in the future. I think the way we use them is very important. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, they've provided a wide variety of products to help take celebrity endorsements, brand endorsements, and tie them to sale. in ways that you can effectively measure. I think the opportunities to take that to the next level with VR and other technology is extraordinary. But on that note, a lot of content from these celebrities is being created and regulated today. When you look at what you can do on Twitter, now you have to put the hashtag sponsor, hashtag ad. We should be looking at how these implications will affect other forms of content, like branded content, product integrations. More and more people are installing these ad blockers. More and more people are skipping advertisements. So as we look to create more original content with celebrity or around certain entertainment properties like sports and music, how do we measure the effectiveness of that when we're not going directly for that 15-second or 30-second spot? Those sorts of product endorsements by celebrities and by content creators today is really impactful. And I think as we look to use technology to connect in different ways through VR, et cetera, it's even more opportunity for us.
I hate to keep going to the A word, authenticity.
Oh no.
Right, but I think so. I mean, there are a couple interesting threads for
Taylor
me as I
Swift
think
is
through this.
authentic.
Depends. So I think it's what Megan was asking.
Yeah.
What is a celebrity, right? And so if I look at what National Geographic has been able to do in garnering fans, right? It's about what you just said. It's trust, right? So who is a celebrity? In our world, there often are photographers, right? Some of the best and most well-known photographers in the world. In our community, in our tribe of sort of aspiring photographers, trusts them and admires the work that they do. That has allowed us to grow our social following. On Instagram, we are the most followed media brand, but surpass many other brands like Nike and ESPN with 80 million followers on Instagram because we have a trusted community. We actually turn over the keys to our Instagram handle to a series of photographers who are out in the field doing real exploration, really trying to understand what's happening with big issues around things like climate or animal migration. And so they're trusted celebrities, right? And so I think when you know what matters to your community and your tribe, and you have a celebrity who can make an authentic connection with that consumer, you really have an opportunity to sort of bring your brand promise to life in a way that's meaningful for the consumer.
Yeah, and if you're talking about photographers, that's expanding the definition of celebrity.
Celebrities, yeah. But I think it's
Some
really
analysts are
understanding what matters to. What's that?
Yeah.
Analysts sometimes are celebrities in a very small world.
Right. I mean,
On 3 or 4 people.
Anyone that
Absolutely, 100%.
but I think that's exactly it. Anyone who
You guys are
influences
celebrities in some world. Yeah.
anyone that influences your audience,
your tribe or your community
with
you know,
relative
that
scale.
is.
Well, we talk about ad blocking, when we talk about the future of advertising, you have to think that something that's authentic, we talked about community and tribes finding yourselves in the sort of sprawl of the internet, that has to be the path, or at least a major component of the path to success in the future. Most people don't seek out ads. They receive them, and they either ignore them or they engage with them.
Right.
But people seek out content all the time that's valuable if it adds value to them.
Right.
So how do you, at what time in the consumer journey do you put what message in front of them that makes them, to your point, more inclined to buy your product because of the dogs they like to put in their commercials or what have you? Like, I think it's you can't ignore that point of the equation.
It makes it less gimmicky. You can show somebody an experience versus just tell them about it, right?
But
With someone that
you
they
can go too
trust.
far too.
Do you at MGM use celebrities?
We use influencers. So brand ambassadors aren't a new thing, and we're an entertainment company with entertainers, but we also think that there's a community out there that might appeal to different demographics that we need to explain the experience through versus just talking about it in a brand campaign or even branded content.
Now, branded content is a big topic. I do sometimes listen to old radio shows. I enjoy classic radio from the 40s, and there was a program called the Lux Radio Theater that ran for years, and they had very high production values, and they had the big stars of the day who appeared, like Cary Grant was on there many times, and they did big adaptations of movies, and it was all sponsored by Lux, which is a brand doesn't exist, I don't think, anymore, but it was a soap and also a moisturizer. That was before they decided to separate those two things. And so it would be sponsored by Lux, so it's in the name. And you could wash your clothes with it. So it's a single product. Now we need 3 things for this.
Right.
So anyway, it was sponsored, so it's in the name, the product. And then throughout, like the actor would stop the scene somehow and then kind of get into a promotion for Lux, which is another little scenelet where they're talking to somebody about how great their complexion is because they use this. So, and then they go back to the show. So there really was no break. And the brand is throughout this half hour. I mean, they own it. And they owned it for years. Is that the way branding might be going? I mean, I look at you because you create these kind of things. Does it make a lot of sense for a brand to be immersed in an experience like that?
I do. I think, that line between, having an advertising experience be separate from the larger context that it's being experienced in is going to go away. I think that's a fair prediction for all of us to say, and that in a world where you need to create more authentic experiences, they're going to have to be more closely aligned to create something that people are actually seeking instead of just being served. We have all the data that says people don't like advertising, right? Because it's either a bad experience or it doesn't speak to me personally or it's not authentic. Well, we can solve for that. All of us here can solve for that through the creation of storytelling and story doing and building that experience.
What does it look like, though, the content?
I think the biggest mistake you can make, though, is to try and pretend like you're not doing it. Like, like people are very fine with that. I think we'll see a lot more of brand as patron for a lot of content because as long as it makes sense for their brand. But look at podcasts right now. Like radio is dead again, and like radio is bigger than it's ever been, depending on what your definition of radio is. And it's like, hey, I'm selling you this product because it matters, because I know my audience and I know you want this. And I'll listen to it for 2 minutes, even though it's the same spot every time, because I love the content around it. And as long as they're delivering a lot of value, everyone's in on that. And I think that to try and make it seem like it's content and not advertising is you're just going to fall off a cliff. Like, I think it's okay for you to say, I'm here providing value as a brand, and by the way, here's the great content that's the value exchange in that,
Yeah, I like it though in the podcast experience where you have the actual talent, like reading the script, and oftentimes they'll personalize it too, and maybe even go so far to say, hey guys, buy this because this company supports us and we support you,
100%.
which is part of finding that tribe. It is kind of, it goes back a little bit, but it's a different world today where it's all leading up to this experience, and there's no shame. Nobody's trying to like close anything off. It's very transparent. This is what we're doing, and it's a great experience. And we absolutely can do this as brands, agencies, publishers, putting it all together in multiple mediums. It doesn't just have to be podcasts. Absolutely, there's an opportunity there, and we don't have to shy away from it.
Well, it's nice, we in the beginning, and thank you all, by the way. This has been a great discussion, and you're all very interesting people. Really,
You seem shocked.
I don't know what I was expecting. I'm not sure, but
We went from good looking to interesting though. So.
you were good looking, and now you're really you grew. But we are out of time. We were live here from McGarry Bowen, the offices of McGarry Bowen, and Adobe Think Tank, or Think Tank by Adobe. And there will be actually, if you're attending Ad Week this week, some of you may be, there's going to be an actual tank, and you can go in it, and Adobe's hosting it. And one of them, I believe, is the Confessions of an Advertiser. So you can go in and have your face and voice disguised and just tell it like it is. So it's a truck or something, or it's driving around. Look for it. It's in Midtown Manhattan. So yeah, thank you all. We talked about automation. We talked about transparency. We talked about measurement. There were some bold predictions put on the floor. I think we all remember exactly what they were, and in 2022, we will come back and see if we were right. And I have a feeling we were. And so I want to leave you on a note of optimism. My favorite quote of the day is, "Can love be automated?" Think about that. Thank you very much.
Isn't this the time we're supposed to be passing papers and writing?
All right.
Yeah,
Should be
taking
like-
notes, right?
Yeah.
Well done, Marty.
Checking
It'd be
our
like